Welcome to the call today. My name is Pratibha Kaleb, and I am the Asia-Leds Partnership member. On behalf of the organizing committee, it is my pleasure to welcome you to the third online session titled Financing Solutions for Improving Building Efficiency in Cities. The session is organized under the webinar series of the Building Energy Efficiency Community of Practice of the ALP. Next slide, please. Hence, the agenda for today is as follows. We will start with a recap of the Asia-Leds Partnership and the BE COP, followed by the presentation by our four esteemed panelists. Post this, we welcome attendees to actively participate in an open discussion with our speakers. We will then close the session by sharing with you some of the future activities that we will conduct and where your participation and suggestions will be very valuable. Please do not forget to fill out the feedback form after the discussion, as it will help us to make sure that our future activities under this COP are relevant and are aligned to your interests. Next slide, please. ALP is a voluntary regional network that promotes low emission development strategies in the Asia Pacific region. It is one of the 4 regional platforms of the LEDS Global Partnership. It is a network of more than 1,000 members with 45 government ministries, agencies from 14 countries, and it is hosted by the GIZ. ALP facilitates coordination, collaboration, and partnerships among the technical experts, government agencies, and practitioners. And as an output, the ALP is able to identify, disseminate tools, models, approaches, and good practices in priority local emission development topics to enable peer-to-peer learning and application. We also help to foster capacity building of practitioners through several training workshops, online sessions such as these, and the development of case study documents that highlight the process and lessons for implementation. Next slide, please. About the Building Energy Efficiency Accelerator, it is one of the 6 sustainable energy for all platforms. The activities under BA is coordinated globally by the World Resource Institute. Public-private collaboration that promote sustainable buildings across the globe is the crux of this platform. It supports sustainable subnational governments in accelerating adoption of policies, best practices, and deployment of projects for efficient buildings. This is done through several processes and resources that we have, which is the development of prioritization and tracking processes that can be applied as per local conditions, offering tools, solutions, and technical expertise. And given BA's worldwide network, the platform can help in connecting to finance and funding opportunities, along with providing assistance in collaboration and seeking regional recognition. Currently, there are 52 cities and state partners in 25 countries as members, along with 50 technical organizations and business partners. Regarding the Building and Energy of Efficiency Community of Practice, it was launched in 2019 under the ALP. The intention was to have an interactive network of various actors and experts engaged to work towards tackling policy, finance, and technical challenges and solutions related to building energy efficiency adoption. The platform offers access to a range of tools, resources, and potential technical assistance in the area of building efficiency, which has been specifically contextualized in the Asia Pacific region. A key fact about the COP is that it is demand-driven, so that the platform's activities and resources remain relevant and useful to all our members. Thus, based on your recommendations and feedback, the future sessions will be designed. As per the current, next slide, please. Yes. As per the current plan for the COP, a total of 3 online sessions have been organized. The third session is the one we are currently in presently. Several countries have also had the opportunity to share their experiences, challenges in this sector through this COP. Participating subnational governments, which are the provincial and city representatives, have the opportunity through this to join the Building Efficiency Accelerator and seek technical assistance and advisory support. Currently, next slide, please. Currently, we have over 90+ members from 15 Asian countries as part of the BE Corp, and we look forward to widening our base. So we thus encourage us all who have not joined yet to please join these platforms. Before we move forward and before I hand it over to my colleague Nikhil to introduce the speakers, I would like to go over some of the housekeeping rules for today's session. Participants will be automatically put on mute mode for most of the time. Questions for the participants will be addressed at the end of the presentation. For questions directed to the speakers, kindly type in your question using the chat box below. Please specify to which speaker the question is directed to. During the open discussion, if you would like to share any inputs or experiences, there's an option to notify us by clicking on the raise the hand icon. The organizers will thus unmute you and you can directly address the speakers and the attendees. Under the handout session at the bottom, you can download today's presentation for your reference. And that's all from me. I would now like to hand it over to my colleague Nikhil to introduce the speakers and take the webinar forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Pratibha. Welcome, everyone. We're glad to have all of you here. And we have a great lineup of speakers today. We have Ivan from the Buildings Performance Institute Europe. He is going to be presenting an opening presentation on that addresses enabling actions and mechanisms for financing, particularly looking at renovations in buildings and the European experiences of thereof. We also have Mr. Atif Sayed from IFC, who will address the scenario in Asia and also share global experiences on how government entities and various partners are working together for implementation and financing of building efficiency. Finally, we would have Dhruv Jain and Anurag Bajpai from Green Tree, who will cover 3 interesting use cases for efficiency implementation and also financing mechanisms for the same. Before we go ahead, a brief introduction to each of our speakers. So Ivan, he's a senior project manager at the Buildings Performance Institute Europe. His work experience and academic training covers both engineering and finance topics. He's also worked on international financing projects in Europe, in the Middle East, mainly focusing on building efficiency performance and renovations of public buildings. Previously, he's also worked in the banking industry for as a credit risk analyst. Mr. Atif Sayed, he is the technical lead for IFC's Green Building Program across Asia and the Pacific. He's supporting government regulations, certification systems, and investments in the green building space in several countries in the region. He has over 15 years of experience in the space, and he's supported codes for 7 national and local governments in the region. Anurag Bajpai is the co-founder and director of at Green Tree Global. He heads Green Tree. He has 14 years of experience, and his core expertise lies on energy efficiency implementation, having worked with a number of public entities and developmental initiatives. He's also a certified Griha evaluator in India and also an impanel expert for India's Energy Conservation Building Code, and he's a part of various national bodies and committees that address building policy and advancement. Mr. Dhruv Jain is the director at Green Tree. Dhruv has 11 years of experience, and his experience in the energy sector includes working with the USAID Eco3 project in India. Also, he worked previously with Siemens as well, and he's also had experience of working in Europe, particularly with the REAP initiative in Vienna. I now welcome Ivan to deliver his presentation. Thank you. Over to you, Ivan.
Thank you, Nikhil. Hello, everyone. My name is Ivan Yankovic. I'm a senior project manager in BPOE. And Today I will try to explain what cities may need to overcome financing barriers related to building renovation. Next slide, please. Couple of words about BPIE. Just quickly, the Building Performance Institute Europe, or BPIE, is a not-for-profit think tank based in Brussels and Berlin. We are focused on independent analysis related to different topics from the field of energy performance of buildings. We support policy making in this field and have been recently involved in different public and privately financed projects. Recently, BPIE participated the BA project, where we prepared a renovation playbook helping cities to accelerate their efficiency actions. And today I will present some of the conclusions from this report related to financing. Next slide, please. So, as I said, the main topic for today is explaining actions and mechanisms cities can use to address financial barriers for building renovation. And in that sense, I will first present some of the main challenges and barriers, continue with tools that can be used for resolving these barriers, and finally present a couple of successful case studies from Europe. Next slide, please. Whenever we talk about challenges and whenever we talk about financing renovation of buildings, there are some barriers we have to deal with. Definitely, we should remember that renovating buildings is a long-term process, and this usually depends on the size of the building stock that will be renovated. But the period we talk about is around 10 to 15 years or more. And from the technical point of view, planning is easy, but if we think about financing, the longer the planning horizon is, the more difficult the planning is, mostly because of different possible changes in financing terms, available funds, even financiers' strategies that can take place over that long period of time. Another barrier is that cities may lack enough expertise to design and implement different financing schemes. This doesn't mean only that there might be problems with assessing financing needs, but also with applying to different funds that may have comprehensive lists of requirements, for example, or there may be problems with being able to propose and design effective and successful financing instruments. Another barrier, and what usually happens, is that cities rely a lot on public funds, while at least in Europe we know that public funding is not enough to support renovation, to cover capex needed for renovation, and that private financing is a crucial link for successful execution of renovation. We should say here that this is mostly true at country or regional level, but it may be easily applicable to cities as well, especially those that are bigger in size. Also, one of very important barriers is that energy efficiency investments are usually perceived as highly risky ones. This may be due to various reasons. I can mention here lack of adequate collaterals and usually lack of adequate information that would support decision making in the sense that it would provide proper information about investments, risks, and returns. Also, the last item in this list, but not the last item in the total list, is that financing may be limited by different restrictions. For example, strict local budgeting regulations will be always reflected on financing the renovation. As an example, we can mention that cities may have legally prescribed debt ceilings, and it can happen that the city is not in the position to borrow additional funds, which may be a significant obstacle for financing. Next slide, please. So if we talk about renovation support tools and how these obstacles could be resolved, we should say that financing plans should be definitely regularly monitored and with updates of financing needs and available sources whenever it is needed. As an example, as a successful example of how we can deal with this, I would mention that EU member states are obliged to submit and update their long-term renovation strategies regularly. And when updating these, actually financing sections are usually those that will be changed and updated the most. Another possible solution for another obstacle regarding the lack of expertise may be TA facilities, technical assistance facilities, usually provided by large IFIs such as European Investment Bank. And these TA facilities are designed to finance and also support project preparation activities. As we said, private investments may be crucial for financing the renovation of buildings. And here we should remember that we don't have in mind only building owners and individuals, but also financing institutions, construction companies, energy utilities, grid operators, energy suppliers, and all these may have different incentives to join the energy renovation of buildings, and so resolving the obstacle of mobilizing private investments is actually to understand these incentives and to exploit them properly. And that is what cities can do to resolve this obstacle. If we talk about how risky energy efficiency investments and renovation of buildings, investments in renovation of buildings are, there are different techniques for mitigating these risks. For example, there is aggregation of projects, and that is one of the tools that could help with reducing the energy investment risk. For example, a city could support energy utility companies and include them in energy retrofits in financing schemes, while in turn, what utilities would do is that they would group many similar projects, usually from their customer database, and offer them to investors for financing, which reduces risks. Regarding other risk mitigation techniques, a city could establish, for example, and use a guarantee fund for covering defaulting loans provided by local banks. Another solution would be to use different open source energy efficiency databases, such as deep database that exists at the EU level, which covers energy efficiency investments in Europe. What these databases could support and provide is a lot of information about risks and returns related to different energy investments, not only investments in renovation of buildings. Next slide, please. So before going to case studies, I would mention here that whenever we talk about financing, financing the renovation or any other type of financing, there are two different aspects that we should keep in our minds. Both of these are equally important, and actually the way how these two aspects are combined is what will, one of very important things that will determine success of the renovation of buildings and financing this renovation. The first aspect is securing enough capital for renovation. This can be done by using national capital available from national or regional funds and levels. Also, capital can be secured from borrowing. For example, a city can issue bonds to finance the renovation. An example of this we will see in one of the case studies. Also, a city could use its current budget revenue, such as different taxes, fees, and contributions collected at local level to finance renovation. If we talk about investing and how these funds will be used, what cities could do is that they could provide grants for renovation purposes. They could provide soft loans through local financial institutions, local banks. And they can make, as we mentioned before, and as we will see in case studies, guarantee funds to support and low-income entities, and actually to reduce risks for local financing institutions. Next slide, please. Now I'll present briefly 3 case studies. They seemed as good examples because they you can recognize in them some of the suggestions presented before and see how they are implemented in practice. The first case study comes from Paris. This city recently decided to finance long-term sustainable investments by issuing green bonds that provided the city with external funds. What we should remember is that successful issuance of bonds and making investors interested in these bonds requires not only identification of projects, so where the collected capital will be used, but also project aggregation and substantial tracking and reporting of the results. Efforts used for designing and advertising these bonds definitely paid off for Paris, since it was able to collect around 1.2 million euros in only a few days after starting with issuing these bonds. Next slide, please. Another successful example took place in Brussels. And here local authorities set up a guarantee fund to support loans distributed by local credit institutions. Such fund is used to mobilize private investments by reducing the default risk that may be pretty high in case of low-income households, for example, and credit capacity of a city or municipality plays a crucial role here, since it is one of the main risk reducing factors for the financial institutions. A bit about details. City of Brussels entered into this scheme with help from a local credit institution, Credal, and together with City of Brussels, this institution provided around 8 million euros of loans to citizens and triggered around 5 euros of private investments per 1 euro of public investments, which is a very good ratio in case of this type of investments. Next slide, please. The third and the last example comes from Oslo in Norway, and here we can see how this city managed to collect and use funds. Oslo managed to design and to implement climate and energy fund that was filled with local electricity tax, while funds from this money from this fund was later used for investing in energy and carbon reducing measures through loans and grants provided to households and businesses. The fund managed to make a significant switch to energy, to using energy from renewable energy sources. So a large number of gas-fired boilers was replaced by either heat pumps or district heating connections, which resulted in significant reduction of CO2 emissions. And additional interesting thing is that the level of success of this idea and of this fund can be understood from the fact that Oslo in this way triggered the change also at the national level and persuaded the Norwegian government to impose ban on using heating oil, which should enter into force this year. So this is one of very interesting examples how the incentive went from local level, from the city level to the national level. Next slide, please. So with this, I would finish my presentation. Thank you all for your attention, and please don't hesitate to contact either to visit our website and to contact BPIE or myself in case you have any question related to this topic. Thank you.
Thank you, Ivan. That was great. We request the audience to direct any questions in the question box to Ivan. I now welcome Mr. Atif Sayed to deliver his presentation, please.
Can you see my screen?
Yeah, we can.
Okay, great. Thank you. So good morning, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Atif Sayed. I work for the International Finance Corporation, which is part of the World Bank Group. I work as a green building specialist for the Asia and the Pacific regions. So I'll start with a very brief introduction of who we are. IFC, International Finance Corporation, is a part of the World Bank Group family, but we deal primarily with the private sector investment and advisory support. But we sometimes also work with local governments, with city governments, and sometimes even national governments. And I'll show some examples of the kind of work we've done. So our work is primarily on investment, but we also do a lot of advisory work, which is where my focus is primarily on the advisory side. But I can share some of the work that we've done on the investment side as well. As part of our team, we started this green building market transformation program a few years ago, which looks at improving the efficiency of buildings in the emerging markets in the countries where we are engaging, because buildings offer one of the most cost-efficient ways of reducing greenhouse gas emissions. Our strategy has 4 components. Firstly, on the investment side, we work with our direct investments. So we invest with green building developers, manufacturers, etc. And then we invest through our partners, through local banks and financial institutions, who then on lend to green building developers and to green building buyers and to green building technology providers. But in order to have a platform built for this to happen, we often need to work on the policy side with the government, which is that green box that you see here, where we work on developing green building codes, minimum standards, incentives, and other such policies, banking and regulatory policies as well, which would enable green building investments and green building growth in general. And to enable all these activities, we've come up with a certification system called EDGE, which I'll talk more about later, which is designed specially for the emerging markets. And although it's a global system, it has local context and local data. So you will be evaluated on a local standard, not an international standard, when a building is evaluated using the system. So why are we interested? One is the impact, the enormous impact that this can create, and the second is this huge investment opportunity that's out there. As you probably know very well, we are on the verge of, actually we are in the middle of a huge urban shift happening in most of Asia, in East Asia and South Asia, and it's happening in a few other parts of the world as well. But East Asia and South Asia is where it's quite predominant right now. And when people move to cities, they require more housing, they require more offices and workplaces, etc. So that's where most of the new construction is expected to happen over the next few years. And because of that, we see a huge opportunity to the tune of about $24 trillion by 2030. And as you can see, a lot of it is happening in East Asia and South Asia, again, because of those reasons that I mentioned. East Asia is obviously driven primarily by China, but there are other big countries there that are seeing a huge demand in construction, in new construction. So this is something that cannot be done in isolation. We believe in a very comprehensive approach. So we try to involve partners from different parts of the spectrum, right from developers to governments to large portfolio owners to corporations to financial institutions and to other rating systems and institutions as well. Uh, so this cannot be done in isolation. The problem is so huge globally that it has to be done in a thought about manner and in a collaborative manner with the other stakeholders. So very putting it very simply, the path to green buildings, especially looking at from the government perspective, is firstly there is a technical pathway, there is a technical aspect to it, which looks at setting minimum standards and codes and regulations, and then promoting incentives, promoting higher uptake of green buildings through incentives and other policies. And I'll give some example of the incentives to basically drive up the demand for green buildings. And to meet the demand, then the government could provide the enabling environment for financial institutions to come in to promote their own financing and to work with the private sector financing. And again, I'll give some examples of how that's been done in a few countries where we've been active. The focus primarily in our markets, the one that we're focusing is on new buildings, because as I showed in the earlier slides, most of the construction that's happening right now is in these parts of the world, in East and South Asia. And if we don't act fast enough, this will be an opportunity that will be lost. And then the inefficiencies in those buildings will be locked for a very long time. Of course, retrofits of existing buildings is another huge opportunity. In fact, in terms of volume, this is a far bigger opportunity, but it's a much more difficult one in the sense that the building is already in there, it's already built. Now to change it, to update it, requires more cost, more effort, and it does not typically give as good a return as new building improvements do. But still, this is a huge opportunity, and we are working on that as well. And then to power both existing and new buildings, you need clean energy. So we worked on a few aspects on both on-site renewable energy as well as off-site. And we work with governments who are promoting this and in putting together plans to do this as well. So you need all three. You need carrots, so like incentives. You need sticks, so minimum standards, mandatory regulations, something that's required for all to do. And then you need tambourine. So tambourine is what makes a noise, what attracts people. And this is more about celebrating success and how you can actually tell the various players in the market that building green buildings, buying green buildings, investing in green buildings is a winning proposition, and there is benefit to all parties there. So I'll give a brief example of that as well. So the first case study that I'll quickly highlight is about Indonesia. We've been active in Indonesia for about 8-9 years. And the first thing we did was to plant the seed for efficiency improvements. When we went in there, we found that there were no standards for construction that related to resource efficiency, energy efficiency, water efficiency, material efficiency, etc. So we worked with the governments, initially with the local governments in 3 cities, one of three of the biggest cities in Indonesia, and then worked with the national government on setting those mandatory building codes, green building codes that are now required in many parts of the country before a new construction permit is given to a building. And those are minimum standards, so they're not very high standards, but we want to encourage higher standards. And we did that by working through our EDGE certification system and also partnering with the local green building certification provider and trying to get as many private players commit to higher efficiency through the system. Then we started working with the financial institutions there on especially the government bank and the regulatory authorities on requiring the local banks to do mandatory reporting on green finance. That was kind of a first start. So the banks started to think about this. And then in the last year or so, we've worked with the central bank, who has now issued an incentive for green homes. So you need to have a lower down payment. 15 earlier it used to be 15%. Now it's gone down to 10% just for the green homes. And lastly, we've invested now because the ground is quite fertile. So we've invested ourselves, and also we've worked with other investors, global investors. And one of the examples is this green bond that we helped one of the banks issue, the first such green bond in Indonesia. There are several tools around for it. So this is not very complicated as long as you have all the players in place and all the information available. So, and in order to do that, we've been working on developing these partnerships and tools. And one of those tools is our EDGE certification system, which I'll explain briefly. The EDGE certification system is helping set a standard for higher performance buildings in our emerging markets. So the first part of that is a validation system, some system where people can go and really check that this is really a green building and it's not a case of greenwashing, and therefore build trust in the market and especially from the investors. Then we've set a local standard, which is 20% improvement above the local baseline. And this applies globally. So anywhere you go in the world, and the EDGE standard for green buildings is a 20% improved performance against the local baseline that we've established. So this resolves a big problem where people say that we are being compared to an American standard or a European standard, although our market is not as mature. So this kind of addresses that problem. And then lastly, the reporting problem, which is huge. And as Ivan mentioned, most of the green investments now require a lot of monitoring, measurement, reporting, and tracking. So we try to address that issue through EDGE as well. So the free software is available now for anyone to use, and I'll show you a quick glimpse of that software. That anybody could go in and enter their values and see how their building or their building portfolio is performing against that local standard and how far they are from meeting the green standard. And if any improvement is needed, how much would it cost and what the payback would be. And then that is all verified by independent auditors who then issue the green building label or the certificate, which can be used as a criteria for green investments. There are 3 different levels of its certification. Certified is just at 20%, but you can go beyond to a 40% improvement above baseline, or you can go all the way up to zero carbon. And we expect more finance would be available for these higher standards in the future. So I'll just show a very brief glimpse. I will not actually run the software, but I've already put in some values, so I'll just show you what it looks like. So it's available on edgebuildings.com, and you go in and just select the building type. You have multiple building types. You select the building type that you want to assess. Select your country. We have over 150 countries in the database now. Select your city. Select your income category for homes, and then put in your building description. And that's pretty much it. It tells you what the baseline value for this building performance would be for energy consumption. And then you can start to select these improvement measures on the left. So, and then that will have an impact on this bar on the right, which shows our actual design performance. So as you can see, I've selected a few measures and we are already above 40% mark here. And then similar logic applies to water and materials as well. So feel free to go and check this website. It's at edgebuildings.com, and it's available completely free of charge. So using these mechanisms, we are working on all three aspects on green bonds, green construction finance, and green mortgages. So far, we've invested 5.4 billion directly with investors as green construction finance, and we're working with several banks on green mortgages. And as I showed, we have been working on green bonds as well. I'll show some more examples of that. This slide, which is in your deck now, is just showing how Edge can facilitate green bonds, because green bonds can be confusing for somebody who's not familiar with it. So because there are some criteria to be met, and then you need a second opinion, and there are certain reporting requirements. And Edge has been designed to facilitate all of that, and it has already been recognized as a criteria, as a valid criteria by Green Climate Bonds Initiative, by ICMA, and GRESB as well, and for reporting mechanism by CDP, the Carbon Disclosure Project. I'll show one quick example and then I'll close the presentation. So this is in Colombia, where similar to Indonesia, we started working first on training and education through construction of Chamber of Construction, Camacol. We worked on several demonstration projects with banks, universities, and then when the market was ripe, we worked on the first green bond in Colombia, which was focused on green buildings. And then alongside, there were several incentives that were being provided both by the government as well as by the banks. And the result of this overall approach is that within the last I would say 6 years or so, we've seen a huge surge in green building in Colombia, with already 2.4 million square meters certified as green buildings, as mostly homes. And then they're now expanding into neighboring countries as well. So this is one of those banks that we worked with. When they issued the green bond with our support, they were oversubscribed 2.8 times. And initially there is a discount that's provided, but then that discount kind of tapers down after a few years. So I'll skip the other examples. There are examples from multiple countries that you can see. And then there are some examples on incentives by government as well. Those incentives could range from reduction in permit fee, on property tax discounts, on more floor area or higher floor area, extra floor area ratio that could be provided. The other thing that we see coming up in the future is aggregation, especially for refurbishments. So we're now trying to work with multiple agencies and trying to pull together projects that can be improved in terms of their efficiency. And then we could put in some investments from our own or work with other investors and try to finance those portfolios of refurbishment. Okay, I'll stop there. This is the last slide. This is just showing how increasing awareness can make a difference. This is an example from Vietnam, where one of the developers that we worked with, they did an extensive campaign of showing the impact of their green homes for the customers, for the market. And because of that, their sales increased significantly, 3 times over a period of 3 months, just by properly showing the impact. And they won international recognition for that as well, and they're quite happy. And now they've committed their entire portfolio, upcoming portfolio, to be green through EDGE certification. So there are a lot of other examples available in our reports that we've published recently. So I invite you to go to our website, ifc.org/green buildings report, to see this report, which is on finance and policy blueprints. And then there is another report on what governments can do in terms of policy. So the policy pathways report is just been launched in the last 15 days or so. So please go and explore that, and let us know how we can work together with you. So I'll stop there, and then I can take questions at the end of the presentation. So thank you all.
Thank you for sharing the experiences and also the resources that IFC's supported through your work. We will also take questions from Mr. Atif as well, so please send in your questions if any. And now we move to Anurag and Dhruv to present on the cases for implementation, financing options. Over to you, Dhruv and Anurag.
Thank you, Nikhil, for the opportunity. Thank you, Ekley, as well. So our presentation and the case studies that we'll be presenting on financial solutions for improved building efficiency in cities. So I, along with Dhruv Jain, will be presenting these 3 case studies. I'll request Dhruv to start the first one.
Yep. So, thanks, Anurag, and thank you, Nikhil. I hope I'm audible. Yeah, so can we move to the next slide, please? All right. So so this is what we're going to briefly cover. So what we've put together for this presentation is a mix of work that we've done over the last few years, and we have tried to compress it into very brief case studies for users to understand how different level of interventions can be financed differently in the market. So that is the intent of what we are going to present from our own experience of working in this market in India. So we are going to look at 3 levels of studies. Next slide, please. Yeah. So we're going to look at energy efficiency interventions and their financing at 3 levels. The first level talks about the interventions which are possible at a user level, at an individual level, and therein what are the possible financing mechanisms from the external environment which are available in the Indian market. Second, we are going to look at a building level or a campus level intervention. So we're going to look at some of our own projects that we've done and the financing solutions which have either been proposed or been implemented. And lastly, we go one step up and we look at city level interventions for energy efficiency improvements, and we look at the financing options that have been implemented for executing such projects. So so each one of so we will basically be covering these 3 topics by way of case studies in the subsequent slides, but I will summarize what we're going to cover in the next 3-4 slides. At the user level, yeah. So can we go back to the previous slide, please? Right. So at the user level, we're going to look at appliance level energy performance improvement and detection as a case. And so the financing option here that we're going to showcase is a pay-as-you-go option. We'll look at that when we go to the slide. At the building or the campus level, we're going to look at technologies like district cooling systems and rooftop solar systems, so systems which are integrated at a building level. And the financing option that we're going to present here is a pay-as-you-use option. So, and the last one is a city level intervention. We are going to look at one of projects being implemented in a city in India for the street lighting system retrofit, and the financing option here that has been exercised by the client is pay-as-you-save model. So we look at these three different financing options by the use of case studies as we go forward. Next slide, please. Okay, so the first one that we're going to discuss right now is the user level intervention. So this is one of the projects that we did as a pilot in the Indian market a couple of months back, wherein we said, let's look at ways to find out the individual appliance level energy efficiency. So there are 2 steps to it. One is we find out what is the energy performance, energy consumption of individual appliances at a user's home. Second, how do we benchmark it against the best-in-class devices? And third, then how do we finance these retrofits? So this is a very simple hardware tool that we developed, which can be installed at residential premises. And the energy, the simple box is installed in a distribution panel in a home, and it basically intelligently guesses the amount of energy which is being consumed per appliance. Yeah, so this right now is only estimating the amount of energy consumption per appliance for top energy guzzlers, not the smaller ones like mobile chargers and all, but for the bigger devices, it can guess and estimate what is the energy consumption that you are doing per appliance. Then what this the meter does is this hardware sends this data to the cloud. The cloud then checks this information and benchmarks it against the data internally available, and it gives you a score on how efficient your appliance is. And based on your specific usage, if you decide to upgrade the appliance into a more energy efficient appliance which is available in the market, what will be the savings percentage and what will be the payback period. So this is something that device can tell you. So we talk to some parties. For example, a very simple use case for these kind of interventions can be your air conditioners. If I choose to retrofit my air conditioner with a more efficient air conditioner, so what is the energy savings that I will get from the new AC that I'm going to buy, and what is going to be my payback period? This is something that this device can tell me. And the other thing that we worked out is how to finance these investments, because not every user would be willing to make upfront investments to retrofit these devices. So we had spoken to some third-party consumer finance companies. So a lot of them are active in Indian market, the private companies. So they basically get in touch with the customer and finance these devices on a monthly EMI basis. So which is why we call this model as a pay-as-you-go model. So there is no concept of measuring the amount of saving here and then linking your payment with that, because it's an individual user level financing that the company is doing. So it's basically a pay-as-you-go. So you don't make an upfront investment into the project or the appliance, but you pay in monthly installments. So which is why it is easier for you to carry out certain such interventions at your house. So let's go to the next slide, please. Okay, so moving on, Anurag, I would such a request if you can take up the next two case studies.
Yeah, Dhruv. So the next case study is investment grade energy audit of typical buildings in Nagpur. As we understand that Nagpur is a shallow developed city. There we have selected, let's say, a couple of residences, group housing project, couple of government offices. They are typical government offices which have, let's say, some of them have air conditioners, some of them have desert coolers, and then the fans as well. And then couple of hotels which are non-star hotels in Nagpur. So out of, let's say, these 6 to 7 typical buildings data collection, we were there in Nagpur, and then we did the data collection, we took out the inferences, and then based on the energy audit numbers, the calibrated energy modeling was also done based on a very typical office building project. And then based on this calibrated modeling, we set aside the ECMs, energy conservation measures. And these ECMs primarily covering the comfort systems, the lightings, and the controls. Envelope also was covered in terms of what will be the glass specification in case it gets changed. Then solar reflective index in case if the roof is open to sky and it doesn't have any covering in terms of the solar or any other equipment installed over the rooftop. Then solar reflective index in terms of the paint as a solution available. Then we also talk about other specific areas in terms of envelope improvement, because most of the buildings that we see in this slide itself, they're almost like 10 to 15 years old in terms of the technology with respect to the structure design. Certainly they are very potential areas in terms of the improvement of efficiency. Now, based on the data, real-time data, and then the prioritization of the ECMs were done, and based on this, the recommendations were drawn on a couple of ways basis. The first, what would be the policy interventions can be brought in for the bylaws, primarily for urban local body, so that the upcoming buildings should have certain specific measures which have not been envisaged during the design time. And this is where we see some of the very specific interventions like cool roof or glass specification or shading design. They are pretty much like related to the urban local body scope or the bylaws implementation scope. So they were drawn from the intervention or the data. The second one, in terms of the existing built stock which is available, what kind of, let's say, the mechanisms could be proposed so that the existing buildings can be made efficient. And that is where we apparently proposed one model where you will be being urban local body being the main client or the bulk client, and then Energy Efficiency Services Limited along with state designated agency, they could become the aggregator in this proposition. And then they were apparently sharing the savings as well, and then based on the successful modalities, the facilitation of the government in terms of the policy guidelines and notification was supposed to be done. But one more thing which is more important in this model is third-party monitoring. As Atif has also mentioned, that all these implementation with respect to the city level or at the town level, the third-party monitoring agency's role is very, very crucial. What is the implementation stage, and then the performance contracting model, which has also mentioned in terms of M&B protocols, whether they are being followed or there is any specific change is required at the current time compared to the earlier when the contract agreement got signed. So this is something which is very, very interesting exercise that we have done for Accelerator in Nagpur. Can we move to the next case study, please? Yes. So this is again a very, very specific, very interesting project that we are doing. The project name is Nalanda University. This is one of the best institution which is getting built as of now. It has a plot area close to 500 acres, and it has a vision in terms of establishing this campus as net zero campus in terms of energy, net zero discharge in terms of the water, and also the zero waste discharge in terms of the waste management. So this design versus the implementation model is pretty much like following the same the vision statement set by the university officials. At this point of time, if we look at the overall requirement in terms of the total built up area, which is almost like 1.8 million square meter. Total cooling load requirement is almost like 15,000 refrigeration of tonnage, which is a peak cooling load. Then we also need to look at the total peak power demand, which is almost like 22 megawatt as a total peak power demand for the campus. Now, one of the most important aspect for the campus was to give the comfort cooling for the entire campus. If you look at the total types of buildings, which includes administration building, classrooms, library, laboratory blocks, residential blocks for employees and professors, and also the hostels. Different set of buildings, they are a part of the campus, and almost like 35 set of these buildings are there. And then all these buildings are also operated or getting operated at different times, like except hostels, residential blocks, all rest of the buildings, they'll be running during the daytime, whereas the residential facilities shall be running during the night time. And that is where the cooling requirement and the peak load that certainly be managed very, very well and efficiently one of the options that we also explored during the design and tendering stage was cooling as a service model here. So Tabreed is one of the organization. They also have a base in Gurgaon. They have been contacted for the investment proposal because college was also interested in or exploring in terms of finding new technology along with the service as a cooling as a service model. So they certainly have this as a solution, and they propose that based on their investment in terms of installing the chillers, in terms of geothermal cooling and other high efficient cooling systems, they'll be charging the university in terms of the fixed cost as well as the variable cost in terms of the cooling consumed in terms of, let's say, the per tonnage hour requirement rate. So this is the fixed versus variable model that they have proposed, and the performance contracting or the concession contracting agreement was for 30 to 50 years. That was the initial proposal that came during the pre-tendering stage for the university. And the plus point was that most of the investment, along with the installation of these cooling chillers and the machines, they also were putting up everything in terms of the supply side, the equipment like the renewable energy systems, the transformer, the supplies, and etc. Everything, so that they also could get the sufficient electricity supply during the peak or the average loads of running the university. So this model as a cooling as a service was very much appreciated. Still, the project is in this particular component is in tendering stage, and we still have to look at the actual installations of this as a model there. Request Dhruv to take the next case study.
Yeah, can we move on to the next slide? Yeah, thanks. So that brings us to the last slide of our presentation. Here we talk about a different financing model, which is an intervention that is being carried out. So this is also a project which is underway right now. It's a project being carried out at the entire city level for improving the energy efficiency or the energy performance of the complete street lighting network of the city. So, I mean, it's a project which looks simple, but the targeted savings through this project is more than 85% of the current consumption. So it's a huge target that they have set up for themselves by the way of complete overhaul of the street lighting network of the city. And the financing model here that has been deployed is a pay-as-you-save model, which is a typical ESCO project. The chart that we see on screen and the figure, the diagram, illustrates how a typical ESCO model works. So the funding is provided by a third-party lender normally, or it could also be the ESCO company which decides to put in its own money. So the ESCO company invests in the project. The project is owned by the facility owner, and the money or the savings which are generated by the way of the interventions that have been carried out are deposited into an escrow account, and from the escrow account the savings, a fixed percentage share of the saving accrues back to the escrow company, and the balance saving accrues back to the facility owner. So that's how this model typically works in brief. In this case, so we're working as a service partner for this project. The scope of the project is to prepare the entire register of all the assets in the street lighting network that the city has, and carry out the baseline survey. So essentially to assess the current energy consumption, and then on top of it, the ESCO company has to deliver an 85% energy savings by the way of various interventions that have to be carried out. Yeah. So in fact, apart from the percentage sharing model, the client has also agreed to pay a fixed payment fee per pole of electricity and 80% of the energy savings for a period of 10 years. So that's how the ESCO company, which is going to invest into this project, is going to recover its money from projects. So that was the last model for financing that we have been working on at Greentree Global since the last couple of years. So with that, I come to the end of my presentation, and I hand it over to Nikhil for taking up question Q&A session.
Thank you, Anurag and Dhruv. Can we have the next slide, please? Yeah, we'll move on to discussions now. So maybe while participants mull over these questions, to share any experiences or inputs that you have in your region or your city for financing of building energy efficiency. In the meanwhile, we'll just take up a few questions for the panelists, starting with Ivan. So Ivan, in your experience, have you come across any policy measure that help to mobilize financing, local financing, or any other financing to implement building efficiency in your region?
Yes, I would mention one very successful example of policy implementation that comes from Estonia and from where it was applied in different cities. I must say that there is a credits fund in Estonia that has been active for many years and went through different stages and was very successful. One of very good policy measures that supported this fund, and the success of this fund, and I must say not directly private financing, but indirectly, but extremely important policy measure, is that house owners were allowed to make apartment owners in multi-family buildings in apartment blocks were allowed to make positive decisions with 50% of participants plus one vote. And this is the policy that replaced what existed before in Estonia and in multi-family, multi-apartment buildings, where two-thirds of owners, two-thirds of positive votes from owners was needed in order for a building to make a positive decision about investing. So this policy, as I said, is targeted and supported decision-making process, but it was a key for supporting also private investments, because once the positive decision was possible, then it was much easier for the financing institution simply to consider that building as a housing owners associations and proceed with disbursing loans. So I would say that although credits fund was successful because of other things as well, this is one of the policies that definitely contributed a lot to a success of this fund.
Sure. Thanks. Thank you. Yeah. Next, we would like to call upon Atif. From the work that you've done in the region, how do you think subnational governments can enable private sector participation and investments to help translate national policies into implementation? So any experience or good practices that you can share in this regard?
Sure, thanks for the question. I think the strongest example that we've had is what I had mentioned earlier, which is from Indonesia, where working both with the local government and the national government and the banking sector, the banking regulatory authority, we were able to help create the environment for green financing products to come in and start being used by the clients. The reason the regulatory authority agreed to make the change in climate finance reporting for the banks is because they saw momentum. in the building sector from the governments who were going and asking the banks for green finance, and they had most banks did not have any green finance available at the time. So that creating the demand was very important. The other example that I'd like to share is from Philippines, the city of Mandaluyong, where we again worked on generating green building code for that city. So it's in Metro Manila, part of the Metro Manila area, and they decided to give an incentive for all buildings that achieved a certain level of efficiency in their building. And interestingly, what we saw is that buildings that were not even required to meet the code started to comply with the code just because they wanted that incentive. And that was a non-fiscal incentive in the Philippines. So they were providing extra floor area. So people were really attracted by that incentive, and because of that, a lot more buildings have been built in the last couple of years, which have met the green building standard than otherwise would have. The third example is something that we're working on right now. We still don't have the results. Is from Mongolia. Mongolia is a former Russian influenced state, and most of their old buildings are old style apartments, which are very inefficient. And Mongolia is an extremely cold climate. So we are working with the government there on establishing an energy labeling system for their buildings, which would then be linked to investments on retrofits as well. So basically, the government needs to know which are the most inefficient buildings in our portfolio that we need to target and improve, rather than just going randomly and supporting investments in improvement, but trying to get the most bang out of their buck. So, and we have excellent examples of this happening in Europe. So we're kind of learning from those examples and trying to replicate them in Mongolia as well. But results are still expected to arrive only starting next year for that.
Thank you. Yeah, we have a few questions for the Green Tree team, Anurag and Dhruv. So maybe we'll take them up. There's a question on if you could disclose the city name for the LED street lighting project, if at all, and who's the guarantor for such a project. So that's the first question, and then I'll come to them.
Yeah. So city name, I think we'd like to keep it under wraps for the moment because the project is still underway. But I think this is a model which we will see replicating across the cities in India. So not that it is a model which is very specific to some city, but this is a general model that we will see coming up in different cities. And the undertaking for this project is by the international banking agencies itself. So they are the ones who have kind of developed this project with a special focus on encouraging energy performance in emerging market in developing countries. And the ESCOs in India, they have taken this project up for implementation.
Sure.
Does that answer the question, Nikhil?
Yeah. We have one more question. So on the user level experience for the third party assessor model, so what has been the experience of that in terms of the savings achieved, and also is there any possible building policy change linked to such models that can happen?
So, and that's an interesting question because that is something that we also had in mind when we were working on this product. If we can link your taxes, for example, that we pay for our houses, individual houses, to the overall energy performance score of my individual apartment or my house. If such a policy measure can be worked out, it will be very good for the the energy performance of the entire ecosystem, the residential building sector in India, because there is no such thing in the market right now. So if the question is if there is anything in the market right now, the answer is no. But if it comes up, I think there'll be nothing like it. So it will push the case for energy optimization inside each of our homes to a great extent. And the second part of the question is around what have been the typical what has been the user behavior in the TPA model for the savings achieved. Okay, so the third party financier, I'm assuming this is for the third party financier that we're talking about here. So as I mentioned earlier, the fees for the third party is not really linked to the amount of savings that are generated. So it's a fixed fee model, which is why we call it as a pay as you go model. So the entire savings that accrue from the energy savings that are generated from the retrofit of the appliances, the entire savings accrue to the user himself. Yeah. So, but however, there is one more case, a business model that we've seen in such cases. We've seen that in Delhi with BSES Rajdhani, which is the Discom in Delhi. What EESL did at one point of time is they allowed users to buy fans, LED lights, and all such appliances that EESL was supplying at one point of time. And the financing for such, or the recovery for such purchases, was done through the electricity bill of the consumers and not by the private third-party financiers. So that is also a model which is prevalent. So I think, but the point is again that the user behavior is linked to the energy savings directly, because the savings will accrue to him. So the financier does not carry the risk of savings, or if the savings are not generated. So which is why it does have an impact on the user behavior, because he knows that the entire savings is going to accrue back to him.
Thanks. Thanks. We have one more question, which yeah, either of the panelists can take up. This relates to any initiatives or examples for efficiency in low-cost housing, if there are any such initiatives being undertaken by state governments in India. And if yes, if you can share the details and financing model adopted. Yeah, so it's open to either of the panelists.
So Nikhil, I may try for
Yeah,
this.
sure.
So in terms of the low-cost housing, there is a model under Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana, which is affordable housing scheme. So there are several projects that we are doing with established developers, and then one of the things that we are trying to establish in terms of the envelope efficiency, because we also believe that the user who are going to be there for more than 10 to 15 or 20 years, they certainly might be switching to air conditioning or maybe high energy equipment in case if they could not get the comfort within the flat or the house. So this is something which is being let's say taken care by the shading designs and optimum glass selection, and let's say in case if the building or the tower is G+3 or G+4, then certainly taking care of the roof with respect to the insulation and SRI paint. So there are like very simple measures, but most of the cases the cost also defines these interventions at the developer level. But in terms of the civil or envelope design part, we surely ensure, or the developer also likes to have, because sometimes they are also being governed by the PMAY guideline as per the states, or the bylaws as well, or the projects which are going for these green certifications. They certainly ensure that such interventions, the design intervention to be implemented, so that the cooling requirement for the end user could be deferred in terms of the active cooling, but in terms of the comfort should be availed, should be available at the as is design or as an improved design case.
Thanks, Anurag. We have a question for Atif, and yeah, he'll also follow that up with a question which maybe Atif and Ivan can both address. So for Atif, some of our participants are interested to know how the green building concept, that's the edge, if it can be introduced in the building construction sector in Pakistan. And this is driven by the reason that the government of Pakistan has launched an ambitious policy for construction post-COVID.
Yeah, sure. It can definitely be introduced in Pakistan. And in fact, we have started doing some EDGE certifications in Pakistan already. The key to not just EDGE, but to any kind of green building certification being successful is that all the stakeholders are kind of agree to that concept and are actively involved. So government is definitely one key player, and as you pointed out, government is making some initiatives, taking some initiatives. So that's very good to know. We would love to partner with agencies and government entities there as well to scale it up even further, because now I believe a lot of construction is happening in the cities now, and this is the right time to put in those efficiency measures in place. So yeah, I think it's just a matter of finding the right partners. That's the key challenge right now.
Sure, thank you. Yeah, I think given the time, we will just see if we can have someone from the audience who wants to share any experiences, good practices, or perhaps ask a question. So if anyone wants to speak up, please raise your hand. Or any specific additional questions to the panelists as well. Yeah, we don't see anyone, so maybe we'll just take one final question, and probably Ivan can come in first and Atif can add. So in terms of through all the mechanisms that we have seen, if city governments really want to take action at scale through all the cases and options that we have seen, what are key steps and best practice or good practices that you've seen here? Maybe Ivan can add, and also in the Asian context, what really needs to be addressed in this regard? Thank you.
Thank you, Nikhil. Yes, if we talk about what is crucial and what are the key steps, I would say that first of all, cities would need to be determined to do the renovation, because it is, as I mentioned before in one of my slides, a long-term process. And I always think that the key step is at the beginning to understand what should be done and what will be the costs, what will be the benefits, and to be able to apply something that is in Europe very well developed also in different directives, and that is cost-effective approach to renovation. So I think that the crucial step would be this, to plan in advance well by taking into account cost-effective approach. And what is also crucial there is that cities usually maybe don't have much experience from this field, and also it is a field that has been recently brought up, and it is not easy to I would not expect city government to have experience from this field, of course, but the crucial step there would be to seek for help from experienced design engineers, and other areas of expertise that can help both at local, national, or even international level. So I always think that good planning is the key. I would then finish my answer.
And maybe I can add a little bit to that. So building on what Ivan has said, I think we all understand that local governments typically have limited capacity, especially for financing improvement in their building stock for retrofits or for new buildings. There are some good examples, but there are very few. But I think the stronger or the bigger role local governments can play is as a facilitator, as somebody who can support the development of the pipeline by implementing the standards, by encouraging higher standards, by providing incentives, by walking the talk, by making their own buildings more efficient and then promoting them, building enough awareness in the market. Another possible avenue could be training, by providing training programs and advisory support to private players who want to go for higher efficiency, and possibly as aggregators who can bring together groups of portfolios of projects and then help them get financing. Uh, in the future, in the near future, I expect a lot more to happen on emissions or carbon trading. As that opens up, I think cities might have a bigger role in kind of administering that from their city and how they can actually trade carbon credits from their building stock. And a retrofit program, as we've talked about earlier, is another great idea. And labeling of buildings would really enable that to happen, and that government can have a strong role in doing that.
Hi, thank you, Sayed. My colleague Nikhil has some issues, so I will take over from here. And there are a few more unanswered questions. So for the participants, we will get back to you by email since it's closing time. And thank you to the speakers for making this webinar informative and engaging one. And we also thank the participants for taking the time to session and also for sharing their insights and asking questions and making this more interactive. And moving on to the next steps of the BE platform. So in the month of August, we are planning for a next online session. And as my colleague mentioned, this is a member-driven platform, and we would like the participants' inputs on what kind of topics that we could explore and discuss. And also, we are currently preparing a case study on the NACDO city's energy benchmarking and audit process that was even mentioned in one of our speakers' presentation. So we'll be preparing case study and we'll be sharing with our top members and also other relevant tools and resources and other learning materials as relevant to our communication channels. And also, we will, as a platform, we provide technical assistance to cities and subnational governments that that need support or experts such as expert assistance in the projects related to building energy efficiency. And the participants representing such organizations can send their requests by writing to us. And we also will be developing a summary report, and we'll be sharing it by the end of August to all the top members. Next slide, please. So the presentation, the slide deck from today and the webinar recording will be shared with all the participants and anyone interested in joining the platform or the initiative. I can write to the Asian Partnership. And as my colleague earlier mentioned, this BA initiative is cities for action on building and action on implementing building energy efficiency. And this platform, BA is a platform to where we will help you facilitate the city in joining the initiative, BA initiative in the next phase. That's soon going to start. And yeah, as a last point, there will be a survey form at the end of the presentation, at the end of the webinar. So that will pop up. So please share your feedback, which will also give us insights on what could we discuss in the next upcoming online session. Yeah, thank you all of you from Health Partnership. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you to all participants and also to our esteemed panelists as well.
Thank you all.
Thank you. All the best.
Everyone.
Thank you.